I'm going to outline a concept that I have named the propaganda loop. It's called the propaganda loop because it is cyclical, and when it finishes, it restarts. It just keeps going over and over and over again. And in fact, it becomes more powerful the more often it's repeated. So, step one, we have an enemy, or an other, however you want to call it. We'll say that it is North Korea, the political regime in North Korea, or to be contemporary, it's Hamas, or to be historical in the 20th century, it's the Hitler movement, National Socialist Germany. But you could apply this to anything. You could apply this to the Tsarist regime before World War I, whatever, it doesn't matter. So we're going to say that we're going to make a claim. These are bad guys. These are bad folks. They don't adhere to our morality. That's the first claim. The second part is the presentation of some sort of atrocity propaganda. And so these things are false, or if they did happen, they are blown wildly out of proportion. So let's say that, like in Tsarist Russia, there might have been a riot and the police fire into the crowd and they kill 3 people and wound 10. Well, by the time that it makes it to the liberal press, you have 50 people killed and 200 people injured. What is then done is that this event, or the reportage of this event, is used as justification for the claim that, in this case, the Tsarist government is bad and contrary to our principles. What then happens is that more outlandish claims are made, or more fraudulent claims are made, or things that are completely false or made up, and they're put out there possibly without any sort of justification whatsoever. So no relationship to reality even. And these bizarre claims are put forward, and if someone says, why should we believe this, or do you think this is really true, or are you sure this happened, the response is, we already know that this is the kind of people that they are. This is what they do. So of course it's likely that they did this. When in fact in the first case it was an exaggeration, then it becomes a complete fraud, and this propaganda cycle just keeps repeating over and over again. In that ridiculous claims are justified on the basis of prior claims which haven't been established as being legitimate or real, or however you want to think of it. And just to give perhaps the most, well, we can't give the World War II example, but the World War I example is much less controversial, although there are some people who still try to dispute this stuff. Bizarrely enough, there's still some people who try to dispute this. But in World War I, the Germans, the Imperial German Army, was accused of massive atrocities and war crimes. So just basically the biggest crimes of the day, for instance. The worst things that people were talking about, these were being attributed to the German army. They were, and the big thing was they had marched into Belgium, of course, which Leon de Grelle called the turntable of Europe. The German army had marched in, done their quick, fast, lightning campaign, marched into Belgium, and used that as their launching pad to go into France. And all of this was terribly successful up until they finally stalled out. Well, the British propagandists, what they did was take real events, which were partisan guerrilla warfare that the Belgians carried on against the invading Imperial German army. Now, did the Germans illegally invade Belgium? Well, according to some conceptions, yeah. Belgium hadn't really done anything wrong. They were just in the wrong place at the wrong time, as the saying goes. And so the Germans invaded them with no justification except their own material interest. This is what the Germans had to do to promote German interest, and so they did it. That's really the only justification. And in war, that is pretty much supported by everybody, like FDR, Stalin, Churchill. They all did this. They all said this. It was only a bad thing when the other guy did it. So this is what the Germans did. Naturally, a lot of patriotic, high testosterone Belgian men were very upset that this was going on, that parts of their country were being destroyed, that their food and capital was being requisitioned for the German war effort. I'm sure there were isolated incidents of German soldiers killing or raping or murdering Belgian civilians, because that happens on every side during a war, and even the most disciplined army in the world can't get away from that. So there are reasons as to why this happened, and so these Belgians carried out, in some cases, or in many cases, illegal war against the German army, such as shooting German soldiers in the back with small arms like shotguns and things like that. And what did the German army do in order to maintain peace behind the lines? They carried out arrests and executions, summary executions, right? Because this is a military setting. They're not going to put these guys on trial. They're just going to find them, and if they're confident that these are the people who did this, they're going to execute them. Or in some cases, they will take hostages, and if the attacks continue, then hostages will be executed. Those things are basically legal, or were legal at that time, according to the laws of these countries that were involved. So that's what happened, and it's not good, but you can understand why it happened. And I don't think you could really blame either the Belgian guerrillas, because they were being patriots and, you know, doing what men do. And you can't really blame the Germans either for executing the people that they caught who were doing this stuff. So the problem comes when the British look at this and they say, here's an opportunity for Albion's perfidy to shine through. And so they begin to magnify these stories. And first, they just tell basically what actually happened. And then they start saying that the Germans are just carrying on essentially genocide against Belgian civilians, which of course was not true and can't be substantiated in any way. Then once the Germans have this bad reputation for having done this, which was invading Belgium and then carrying out, what would you say, reactive measures against Belgian attacks, or the attacks of some Belgian civilians, rather, I should say. We won't blame Belgium as a country or a nation, but just the acts of some civilians. The Germans did what they had to do, and so now they've got this reputation for doing this. The British up the ante, and they say that the Germans are actually just, they're just committing genocide. And then once the Germans have this reputation for having committed this unwarranted genocidal act by design, so it's not just soldiers out of control. This is like allegedly what the German army set out to do in Belgium, was to do this to these civilians. Once that has been believed, then we can proceed to the true, completely divorced from reality, bizarre circumstances that the German army are abducting, raping, and murdering Belgian nuns. And so, of course, Germany is half or a third Catholic. So you've got military units that have Catholics in, all, and around them, basically. But we're supposed to believe that either these Catholic troops or these Protestant troops or whatever are raping Belgian nuns and killing them. And then the second thing that they're said to have done is to crucify soldiers from the other side, and it's particularly Canadian soldiers. And the story changes. Is it one soldier? Is it three? Is it an enlisted man? Is it an officer? The story changes, but the idea, and it's also, was this person crucified on a cross or a tree, or was this guy nailed to a barn door? So these are the different manifestations of this crazy story. Of course, that didn't happen either. And then the final and most ridiculous story that's given out as part of this propaganda loop or propaganda cycle is that the Germans were melting down cadavers, corpses, rendering them down into their constituent components and harvesting the human byproducts, the human cadaver's byproducts like fat. And so the crucifixion, the rape of nuns, and the cadaver factory, the melting down the humans into Soylent Green or whatever, those things are part of this propaganda loop, and they never go away. They never go away. So even though people like Lloyd George, and I think one of the prime ministers of Italy, I want to say one of Italy's prime ministers, if not prime minister, one of the top guys in the Italian government, him and Lloyd George and maybe a couple other people, they carried out investigations into all of these claims after the war was over, and they found out it was all made up. And of course, we know today that all of this stuff was cooked up by British plutocrats who were, pardon me, involved in the government and in private business, because in modern plutocratic liberalism, that's what you have is a leftist corporatist model, which, not entirely unlike fascist economics, you have an elite class that cuts across both government and business, and you have a nominally capitalistic economic model with lots and lots of state intervention that is either hidden or disguised or somewhat alluded to. Very similar to how we have Google and Twitter and all these things in America and worldwide, Amazon, that are completely fused into the American military industrial complex. You can't really separate them. All of the big tech was seed capital funded by In-Q-Tel, which is the CIA tech bank, angel investor bank thing. Of course, they get all their money from the Jews anyway, so you can't pull this stuff apart, and it was going on even back then as far as World War I. And so these were the people who were cooking up the propaganda that created this propaganda loop that I'm talking about. So that's what happens. We get this loop gets going, and the prior claims, ridiculous or not, unsubstantiated or not, create in the minds of simple people, normal people, who don't have the time or the resources or even the intellectual capability to evaluate the truthfulness of these claims. People don't have the ability to do that, and so this stuff, it's like if you pay for it, if you pay to put it out there and people see it, it has an effect, and the effect is that it builds up a certain reputation. So, and it's an age before the internet, obviously, so you really just have to get the propaganda or get nothing at all, right? You get yourself, your immediate circle of friends, and you get propaganda, and that's really all you have to go off of. So that propaganda loop established a certain reputation in World War I for Germany, and then in the Second War, all of the same stuff was brought out again, and it was added to, and it became even more ridiculous. And we're still living with it today. And so, like I talked about in the previous video that I did, I feel like before you can make progress on, the issue is that, look, liberalism's bad, right? Liberalism causes us to do certain things that are bad for me, for you, and for everybody else, and bad for us all jointly together as a group. And you say, well, I want to get rid of liberalism, or I want to do things differently. They say, well, there was a guy who said something like that, and look how it turned out. All these people got killed, all these people got their lives ruined, and it was pretty much the worst thing that had ever happened. And so you have to say, well, if you accept that premise, you're done. The argument's over. They're basically right. So you have to dispute these factual claims about what happened and who did it. And so it seems like interrupting the propaganda loop is something that has to be done in order for us to carry out revisions in political ideology and theory. How are you going to get rid of liberalism as long as people have this silver bullet argument against it, which is that the last time that somebody really tried to delete liberalism, as an ideology from our thought space, it turned out like that, right? And it was this horrible, horrible thing. So, exploding propaganda claims has to at least be front-loaded in the project, and of course, that is why we have such strict censorship imposed upon us, because a lot of these claims are ridiculous and have been shown to be ridiculous a very long time ago. And so the point of censorship is to make sure that these propaganda claims survive, and so that when this propaganda loop continues, it's almost like a conveyor belt that's spitting out bricks or something. And so you've got this platform, and it's slowly sinking and falling apart. It's just disintegrating naturally over time. But this conveyor belt is just constantly throwing out new bricks onto this disintegrating platform. And so if you can do something to disrupt the deposition of additional material, eventually that propaganda platform will disintegrate, and that's why they devote so much time and effort and resources into prosecuting people who try to promote a correct view of history, or just trying to ruin the lives of people and embarrass people. And if you don't have anything embarrassing in your past, well, by God, they'll just make something up. So it's not even really worth worrying about that, because you can't protect your reputation anyway. We all have stuff in our past that we're embarrassed about for one reason or another, but that's really no reason from avoiding, I think, putting yourself out there, because you can't talk about this stuff and keep a good reputation. They'll just lie. They'll just make up stuff about you anyway. Okay, I think I said everything I wanted to say. The way that propaganda works in the 20th and 21st century is a reinforcing cycle that brings the public consciousness up to a certain level, false consciousness up to a certain level, so that false consciousness can be used to beat down opponents to the system. If you're anti-system, they have to have this boogeyman to scare people with, and that is the purpose of this propaganda cycle, which may have originally just been established as part of war propaganda. They probably never thought that they would be recycling these lies, back in 1914 when they came up with some of these, and back in 1939 or 41 when they started telling some of these lies. They probably never thought that they would have such a long life. And I think I can prove that. And also, as I've mentioned to many people, I do not at all agree with the notion that is prominent in patriotard circles and just the conspiracy genre more generally. And it's also, I've seen, associated with a lot of Christian millenarian viewpoints. So people believe, for instance, if you're one of these Christian type people, you believe that we're locked into an eternal dualistic war, basically, against Satan, forces of good and evil. And so from their point of view, it is actually possible and probable that there are evil forces who are completely directing the flow of history. They have complete control over history, and all this stuff is actually planned out 100, 200, 500, or 1,000 years in advance, and there's not really anything you can do about it, because the world is going to be ruled by Antichrist. And so all that stuff has to happen, and then eventually there will be a reversal and things will get like they're supposed to be. I don't believe that. And but you see it even in non-Christian people who just have a really, really strong conspiratorial mindset, and they'll say, well, there's really been like one elite that goes back 6,000 years, and they've been running the entire world since ancient Babylon and Sumeria, and we're just, you might talk about Rothschilds or something, but that's just like a modern expression of this ancient conspiracy. And I don't believe that either. Those war propaganda claims that I was just talking about from 1914, 1939, 1941, this sort of stuff. Those claims come out and they're terribly unpolished. They are diverse, so the claims don't match up with each other. A lot of times they're really, really stupid. They don't make any sense. Like, they could have come up with better propaganda claims, but they didn't. And so to me, that implies that a lot of this is haphazard and opportunistic, and it is later exploited by the same people in a different time period or by different people over time, because it's found to be useful in those changed circumstances. So I see general problems throughout history that don't go away and continue to be promoted by similar types of people, rather than one gigantic conspiracy that is basically unbeatable and all-powerful and all-controlling. Okay, so as you can see, I'm still developing some of those same ideas, and this is stuff that I've thought about a lot, but I haven't talked about publicly because I haven't been making videos, obviously. So hope this didn't run on too long. Thank you. We'll talk again.